Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk now about the Chinese spy who has close links to Prince Andrew, who has just been banned from the United Kingdom. It has transpired that he had a very special place within Prince Andrew's team of people, even being told when it comes to Chinese investors that he could act on behalf of the prince, make decisions. And he apparently has a little letter on his phone from one of Andrew's closest advisors saying, we know how to get the courtiers out the way that cause us difficulties, who stand in front of our ambitions. You sit at the top of a tree that many, many people would like to be on. Well, he's now been banned from coming to the UK. This particular Chinese man, MI5 allegedly discovered, was a member of the Chinese Communist Party, Kel Surprise, and was working for its United Front Work Department, which gathers intelligence. Let's speak now to James Heappey, former Conservative Armed Forces Minister. I mean, James, it's big news today. It doesn't surprise many people when it comes to Prince Andrew and some of his sordid affairs. He always was sort of, Air Miles Andy, going around, thinks of himself as, I don't know what, the king of the castle. But he's an easily compromised character, isn't he? How concerned should we be about this connection?
Be very concerned, and I think we should be concerned exactly as you suggest, Alex, on two fronts. Firstly, we should be concerned, and I think this is probably the most important of the concerns, but the way that prominent Chinese officials and business people are clearly being used by the Chinese state to gain access into other states, in this case the UK, but it happens all around the world. And their intention there is to influence, even subvert, and we must guard against that. And so in that sense, the court's decision is the right one to back the Home Secretary of the day, who will have been acting on very, very strong intelligence, I suspect. And so, that's a good thing. The other bit, which I think is less important, but still very worthy of comment, is to see a member of the royal household, even a disgraced member of the royal household, writing in such terms about the access and influence that they have within the British system, and sort of peddling patronage in a way that I think many of your listeners would find quite distasteful. Yeah, it seems to me Sarah Ferguson's also made a bob or two out of various connections to China. But talk to us about the United Front Work Department. This is the sort of network of influencers, for want of a better phrase, who are gathering intelligence for the Chinese Communist Party. One imagines that all states have their people who lobby on behalf of their particular government's interests. They will have people who feed information back. Apparently, we have some of the best security forces and intelligence agencies in the world. So what is it in particular about the Chinese when they do this that is so alarming? Well, look, that's a reasonable point to make. And there is a very fine line between the sort of routine business of diplomacy and the way that states seek to influence each other to secure support on issues of mutual interest internationally, and also to try to encourage favourable trade conditions or visa arrangements for their citizens coming into another country. So, we should be careful not to think that all of this sort of stuff is dodgy. I think what the Chinese and a few others do that crosses a line is that there are, I think they use trained intelligence operatives to do this rather than just diplomats and trade officials. Secondly, I think they do so with the express aim of accessing parts of the UK financial and political systems in order to subvert those systems and to erode trust, and also on plenty of occasions to steal information, intellectual property, and other areas of technological advantage. So we have to be incredibly wary that there's a difference between what the German ambassador does in London and the chief executive of Siemens, for example, and what the Chinese embassy in London is doing and representatives of the Chinese state. They are, on the face of it, perhaps engaged in something that's not dissimilar, but the reality is the intent is entirely different, and the effect of what the Chinese do is really quite insidious.
Do we have any sort of manifestations of how this influence has actually already worked? The sort of thing that the Chinese government might have been, or Chinese Communist Party might have been pushing, that they want Britain to enact or do, and where we can sort of draw the conclusion or make the suggestion that actually their efforts have been rewarded?
Not that I can share without going to prison.
Oh, well, don't do that, because we need you around. I'd be interested to know, though. I mean, blimey, it sounds like there is something then.
I think what you have to do is, this is a very, as I understand it from the reporting, I've got no privileged information on this particular case, but this is a very prominent and apparently wealthy Chinese individual. From most other countries in the world, and indeed many, many Chinese citizens of that financial standing would be welcome to the UK with open arms as inward investors, with the opportunity for them to help grow our economy. So I think you have to assume that for the Home Secretary to take the decision that she took and that the court has subsequently upheld, there must have been some very compelling intelligence for why this individual should not be given access to the UK, and why his apparent access to the Duke of York is so inappropriate. So that's no comment on the specifics. It's no revelation of anything that I may have read whilst in office. But I think if you were to just compare how individuals of this standing would normally be welcomed with open arms because of their opportunity to invest here, and this individual's being turned away, there must be something very compelling for that to have happened.
And yet what I don't understand in the context of all of this is that the Labour Party so far seem to want to sort of normalise relationships with China. They want to go back to having a close working relationship. One assumes because without Beijing's help, they're never going to reach their 2030 net zero targets. But it seems to me that on one hand, they're saying, we're very suspicious and very, alarmed by the activities of the United Front Work Department. But on the other hand, let's do business with China. Are they friend or are they foe? I don't get it. Let's talk about defence spending now. Mark Rutte, the new head of NATO, saying that everyone who's a NATO member needs to pull their socks up and start spending more on defence. Sir Keir Starmer says that, hopefully we'll reach the ambition of 2.5% by the end of the term. Is that going to be enough?
No.
I love that short answer. No. How much do you think we should be spending?
I think that Mark Rutte was right to be putting a number of about 3% on this. I think that should be the sort of target that we're talking about for hitting by the end of the decade. And I think, a pretty straight line route between what we're spending now, 2.4 just under in 2024 and 3% in 2030 would be a really good way of giving the MOD certainty, and just as importantly, giving our defence industry certainty, because there is this kind of chicken and egg thing about, you can increase the budget, but if the industrial capacity isn't there to then build you more stuff, then it's kind of pointless having the bigger budget. But the industrial capacity won't be built until the budget is there. So a clear commitment, not to 2.5%, which is only another 0.1% of GDP to be added to the defence budget in an as yet undefined period of time, but a much bolder commitment to 3%. Brackets, by the way, that's still 2% less than we were spending at the end of the Cold War. But that would be, I think, a much better commitment for the UK to make. And Mark Rutte was right to lay down that challenge yesterday.
And where do you see the greatest threat to Britain is coming from? Is this still sort of the case of, if we appease Russia too much and people think that Donald Trump might sit down and try and broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine, he's going to be coming after a NATO member state next?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very reasonable scenario to plan against. I think, two things could happen under Donald Trump. Well, I suppose three things. One, although I think one of which I think is very unlikely. The unlikely one is that Ukraine continues to be supported. In fact, we accelerate our support and they achieve an overwhelming, decisive victory of their own. But I think that's the least likely. The two more probable routes forward are one, that Western support remains broadly at the level that it is now, and Trump just continues that, in which case the war rumbles on. Europe remains as dangerous as it is now, and therefore we need to be spending more money on defense in order to rise to that increased threat. Or Trump forces a peace, but that's a peace that emboldens Putin, and with so much of the Russian economy, and this was Mark Rutte's point, now being spent on defense, the speed at which the Russian armed forces will rearm creates a situation very similar to, say, 1945, where what you've got is in Ukraine something quite similar to East and West Germany. And actually, NATO will need to rush not only to grow the Ukrainian army to be sufficiently large to hold the line on which that peace is forged, but in all probability, exactly as we had in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s with the UK, France, and America in Western Germany, we will almost certainly need NATO garrisoning Western Ukraine in order to guarantee that peace as well. So whichever scenario you go down, other than the very unlikely scenario of a complete Ukrainian victory, you see a situation where European security is very severely affected, and where therefore NATO and European countries need to respond by spending more on their defence and security.